Hi, I'm Andrew Holden from Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Eric Sasemsky from Boston, Massachusetts.
Eric and I are going to discuss the paclitaxel safety controversy. It's a topic that we actually opened the peripheral session. It was standing room only on Tuesday morning, the 23rd of April, as we opened the session discussing the paclitaxel controversy.
COVID probably had a big impact on that, but this is notable that the whole field has shrunk in the context of the Katsanos meta-analysis. You can see nicely here on the two top bars are immediately post-Katsanos and then immediately post-COVID-19. You can see in blue is pre-paclitaxel. So unfortunately, we're doing worse for our patients. Again, it's not causal. There's many factors that go into this, but the current state in the U.S. is that patients are undergoing more amputation and death after a femoral popliteal intervention than they were prior to the Katsanos meta-analysis. Did the paclitaxel meta-analysis cause harm? I think there's many data here to support that it did. You can see that global restrictions resulted in less durable treatment, more amputation and death in the post-paclitaxel controversy, an increase in economic burden. Is there also good that came from this? I would say yes. Again, it reminded all of us that we needed good clinical trial practice. We never know what's to come. We need complete follow-up. There's been a really significant investment in non-paclitaxel therapies that can really change our practices. We've talked a little bit about alternative data sources, including the impact of real-world evidence, and also the ability for the vascular community, industry, and regulators to band together.
And that has really took a real step forward with patient-level meta-analysis. And maybe, Eric, you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was an exciting year last year because we had been slowly building all this mounting safety data for paclitaxel devices. I think after the controversy started, the response was, how do we show that if this is wrong, what's the right data? How do we convince the regulators that these are devices that remain safe for our patients? And so it all kind of came to a real surprising quick end in July of 2023 when the patient-level meta-analysis done by a collaboration between the industry partners and led by Bill Gray, Peter Snyder, and Sahil Parikh really definitively said there is no evidence that these devices are harming patients in terms of all-cause death.
Yeah. And the FDA were pretty swift to respond to that, to their credit. They were really the first regulatory body to say, therefore, they're not limiting the use of paclitaxel-coated devices for indications of lower limb intervention. What's been the response to that in the U.S., Eric?
Yeah, if you look at some of the data, and we talked about this actually in our session on Tuesday here at Charing Cross, is we saw that after the initial real decline in paclitaxel devices in the U.S. particular, that there was a slow kind of return to prior practices with these drug-coated devices as a lot of the evidence that came out, again, demonstrating the safety of them, even though the FDA had still its black box warning about potential harm for patients.
Yeah.
So, two things I think are worthwhile. One is, I think that physicians, as they felt comfortable with the safety, put their patients first and tried to really resume practices they thought was beneficial for their long-term care. But two, the FDA was continuously looking for opportunities to feel comfortable reversing their stance. And again, I was even, having been very intimately involved in this, pretty surprised by how quickly the FDA not only said we're no longer concerned about the risk of these devices, they removed all the messaging off the labeling of these devices that there would be any potential risk to harm. And that in the U.S. was a very important moment because, we, as in many countries, have a litigious system, and we want to make sure that our physicians are protected when they're practicing in their patients' best interest.
Yeah, I think we have to give the FDA credit. They were quick to provide guidance to stop using paclitaxel devices, but they were also the first regulatory body to say you can resume access. And it's only earlier this year that the MHRA in the UK has also provided similar guidance. And actually, interestingly, in many parts of Europe, clinicians don't have the clear guidance that those two bodies have provided.
I thought that was shocking because the MHRA typically I would have thought would move a little more slowly. And we know that a lot of times regulators around the world will look at the U.S. for some guidance in terms of next steps. But the MHRA followed pretty quickly, and it was earlier this year when they changed their stance. But we're waiting for the rest of the world really to kind of catch up. And I'm not really sure what the delays are right now in terms of maybe accessing the data or whether they need local data. But we still have some room to work to get practices back to where we were.
One of the interesting things is you can understand regulatory bodies reacting to a mortality signal quite quickly. But one of the questions that I posed and challenged you to see if you could provide some information in, were there any unintended consequences in stopping access to a very efficacious device? We know that patencies are better with paclitaxel-coated devices. Could we actually measure unexpected consequences that might be a salutary lesson going forward? And I'm really grateful for the work you did. Perhaps you can share it with us, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that when you asked the FDA, do you feel that you made the right decision about halting practices in the U.S. with these paclitaxel devices? They said, well, listen, mortality is the ultimate endpoint, right?
Yeah.
If it was something maybe that is a little bit more, I don't want to say benign, but not as really, terminal, that maybe there would have been a different approach. But because mortality is what they were dealing with, they had to be a little bit more dramatic with their response. And so, we don't necessarily question their decision-making. I think the only thing we were waiting for is what is needed to get back to where we are now. And we got there. But patients were harmed during this time. And it's unfortunate because it wasn't only paclitaxel. We had COVID, that pandemic. There was a lot that happened between end of 2018 and now 2024. So we took a look at this for Charing Cross specifically. Most updated data we got literally days before the meeting. And, our big question was, first, what happened to U.S. practices? And we all predicted what we saw, which was an immediate drop in drug-coated device use, replacement with uncoated angioplasty and some bare metal stents. And then, as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, that there was some, again, increase in use, even though the regulatory body still had a warning in place. But more dramatically was we looked at death and amputation. So two really important endpoints. And if you look at the pre-paclitaxel period, death and amputation was actually lower, both in unadjusted and adjusted analysis, than in the post-paclitaxel period. And again, I asked myself the same question, is this all effect of COVID? And even when we isolate out the COVID period and are now looking post-COVID, we're still seeing some harm to patients. And so, I think, again, the risk to patients aren't only as the endpoints of death and amputation, which are quite severe, but even needing another intervention, taking off time from work, getting hospitalized. Every time that a vessel fails and they need to come back for procedure, that's risk to the patient. And when we look at drug-coated devices, we're not looking to save the world. We're looking to get patients out of the hospital, make them functional, give them good quality of life as long as possible.
I'm really grateful for, and I'm sure everyone is really grateful for that evidence. It provides some real salutary lessons. But finally, it's not the first meta-analysis that's caused some unfortunate loss of access to an efficacious device. Do you think there are any lessons for us as clinicians and perhaps for regulators in analysing meta-analyses going forward that we might learn from this sorry event?
Yeah. Again, it's now that we're on the flip side of it, it's good to look back and say, what can we do better in the future? And I think regulators are thinking about this, industries are thinking about this, and us as clinicians. And, the most important aspect to any evidence, trial, meta-analysis, observational data, is take a look under the hood. I think that one thing that is really critical is if you break down how these are performed, what's the hypothesis, is the data correct, can the data be combined? We kind of gave a green light to meta-analysis because we all look at that evidence pyramid and it sits at the top. But just because it's a meta-analysis doesn't mean it's done correctly or was done with the right data. And I think for me, a big part of this is to say, let's step back. Let's understand why this was done. Let's understand the data that went into it. Let's understand if this was the right approach and not be swift with our decision-making until we've done that process.
Exactly. Well, listen, thanks again for all your work, not only in the paclitaxel controversy, but particularly for that blockbusting session at Charing Cross on Tuesday morning. And it's great to know that we can now get back to our normal utilisation of paclitaxel-coated devices. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.